A federal judge now says there's ample evidence against this Florida man who kidnapped his wife overseas amidst their messy divorce battle for millions of dollars. This is the case of Anna Knezevich. It's a puzzling one that we've been covering for several months. It started back in February when Anna first went missing. Now, here's some background on Anna. She is from Colombia, but she's also an American citizen who was based in Florida in Fort Lauderdale. At the time of her disappearance, though, she was actually living in Madrid because she was going through a divorce battle and eventually rented an apartment there to get away from her husband. That's her husband of 13 years, David Knezevich, who we'll talk about in a minute. So Anna was last seen on February 2nd. She was in her apartment and she had a phone call with her friend late at night. And that's the last time anyone for sure heard from Anna. But there have been some messages from Anna's phone. So the next day on February 3rd, some people got a strange text message. Here's her friend Sana Ramo to explain that.
I spoke to her that Friday, and then the next day on the 3rd in the afternoon, I received those very strange messages that she had met a man on the street and she was going to go to his summer house, and none of it made sense.
Since Anna's disappearance, Sana has been pretty outspoken. She's actually appeared here on Law&Crime multiple times to tell her story. Sana also shared with us the text that she received on February 3rd, the one that was kind of weird from Anna's phone. Here's what it reads, quote, "I met someone wonderful. He has a summer house about 2 hours from Madrid. We're going there now and I will spend a few days there. Signal is spotty. I'll call you when I get back." This was fishy to Sana, and it also was kind of fishy to Anna's brother, Philippe. I reached out to him about the case, and he says he doesn't want to comment on camera, but he did text me and tell me a bit about this message. So I guess it was normal for Anna and her brother to communicate in Spanish. This is normal, and the text that he got from Anna's phone was in Spanish. But immediately there were red flags for her brother, Philippe, because it didn't sound like Anna. It was actually in a different dialect than she usually wrote in. He told me the text almost read like someone wrote this message in one language and then put it into Google Translate. You know how sometimes when you put something in Google Translate, it doesn't quite add up. You know, it makes sense, but it isn't quite the same. He says this is probably what happened in this case. So after everyone receives these texts from Anna's phone, everyone's getting concerned. And on February 4th, there was a wellness check that was performed on her apartment in Madrid. Firefighters came, they broke down the door, but everything inside seemed normal. The only thing missing was Anna. And in fact, here's the weird part. The apartment had actually been locked from the outside, so there was no sign of forced entry. So right away, Spanish investigators kind of get the wheels turning in this investigation, and they find something pretty strange. In the nearby area to Anna's apartment, there were security camera videos. And looking back on the videos from the night that Anna disappeared, there's a man wearing a helmet who spray paints the lenses almost to completely cover them up. The U.S. Attorney's Office has since released a photo of this. You can take a look at it here. The feds say it's 34-year-old David Knezevich, who's Anna's estranged husband. You make the decision up for yourself. But Sana says she believes that it was David. She says that after Anna's disappearance, she even reached out to him right away. And I know around this same time you reached out to Anna's estranged husband, David. What was he saying? Did you say, do you know where Anna is? How did that conversation go?
Yes. So I reached out to him that Sunday evening. And I remember trying him many, many times before I actually got a hold of him. And he said to me at the time that he was in Fort Lauderdale. And I spoke to him and we talked about what had happened to Anna. He claimed at the time that he had no idea that she was missing. I discussed with him that I was still planning on going to Madrid because I had that trip planned on the 8th. So I said, well, I'm going to go to Madrid and do what I can to find out what's going on and help in any way that I can. I think you should meet me. Are you going to meet me? I even looked up a flight from Miami airport the day before me going to Madrid and suggested for him to take that flight, which he agreed to do. So I went ahead and flew to Madrid on the 8th, and that whole day I tried to reach him. I reached him very late that day. And then he told me that he instead had gone to Serbia.
So right after Anna first disappears, David says he has no idea what's going on. He was actually in his home country of Serbia, but there are some conflicting reports about this. I had seen reports that he said at the time of Anna's disappearance he was in Serbia, but then I'm hearing from you that he was in Fort Lauderdale. So do we really know definitively where he was?
I believe that the report from the FBI has traced him, that he was the dates that he flew to Turkey. The reports say that he flew January 26 to Turkey. So according to FBI, he was not in Fort Lauderdale at the time of Anna's disappearance.
When you did finally get a hold of him after Anna first went missing, was anything strange when you talked to him on the phone? Did anything signal a red flag, so to speak?
Well, his actions to me were very strange. His wife is suspected, is a victim of a crime in Madrid. She's missing, and for him, to go to Serbia and not to come to Madrid was to me very strange. Yeah, that's what I can say. That it was very strange actions on his behalf. If he were to have been in Fort Lauderdale and instead going to Serbia instead of going to Madrid to find his wife.
After Anna disappeared, David actually retained an attorney in Florida, and I reached out to the attorney. They didn't want to speak on camera, but they did share a statement. It reads that David had, quote, spoken to police a number of times. I, the attorney, reached out to the FBI and let them know that we are available to aid in any way. He's given police information on credit cards and attempted to hire a lawyer in Spain. That's about David. And that's really all we heard until May, when David was actually arrested at the Miami International Airport when he got off a plane there. And at that point, he was arrested and charged with Anna's kidnapping. The FBI made this announcement about David's arrest for, quote, his alleged involvement in the kidnapping of a U.S. citizen in Madrid, Spain on or about February 2nd, 2024. Authorities confirmed his arrest was, quote, made without incident by the Diplomatic Security Service and the FBI at Miami International Airport. So during all of this, we're starting to learn more about Anna's case and the shocking evidence that detectives collected in their search for her. So we talked about the spray paint on the cameras, which investigators believe that person we showed you was David, but there's more security camera video too. This shows David, at least according to federal investigators, he is purchasing some duct tape. And also, he's purchasing some spray paint. What's weird about this is it's the same brand of spray paint that was used to cover up the lenses of those cameras. So there's that piece of evidence. It may be circumstantial, but there's some more circumstantial evidence we want to highlight too. Apparently, David was the one who wrote up that text that was sent to Sana, her brother Philippe, the one that they said just didn't sound like Anna. So according to the feds, David met this woman on a dating app. She's Colombian, so she spoke Spanish, and she is the one who wrote up the text. At least according to feds, it wasn't Anna. But then there's a bit more. There's a rental car that David rented in Serbia, and things were kind of strange with this. It was returned with almost 5,000 more miles on it than when it was rented out to David. And also, it was rented out just like a normal car, but came back with tinted windows. So that leads us to believe David is the one who tinted the windows. Spanish authorities say that they had seen a vehicle similar to this rental vehicle with stolen plates. It was in the area of Anna's disappearance, but they weren't able to figure out who the driver was because it had tinted windows. So what really happened to Anna? We still don't actually know, but the feds do have a theory. They say that David killed her in some way in her apartment in Madrid and then carried her body out in a suitcase. They say there's video of him on the elevator leaving the apartment and he's carrying that suitcase. After that, they say that David took the body and put it in the woods in northern Italy. The way that they were able to figure out this geographic area is they used the GPS on that rental car. So we can see that the car started in Serbia, it went to Spain, and it went back to Serbia. But before coming all the way to Serbia, it made that pit stop in northern Italy. And that's where investigators actually have searched for Anna's body. Last month, the FBI, Spanish authorities, and even Italian authorities are involved now. They were all searching, but they didn't find find anything just yet. That brings us to just this week when David appeared in court down in Miami and a judge denied his request for bond a second time. This is Magistrate Judge Edwin Torres. He said there is, quote, ample evidence that David kidnapped Anna and that he's a serious flight risk given the, quote, cunning levels of deception that he has demonstrated. There's a lot of layers to Anna's case, so to really take a closer look, we're speaking with former federal prosecutor Vanessa Singh Johannes. Vanessa, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically is because you're down there in southern Florida. What is the vibe down there? Are people talking about this case?
So I've heard about this case most recently because it's a unique case in the sense that it's not often that you see the U.S. Attorney's Office charge the kidnapping statute. 1201 is the statute under which they charge this case. And that doesn't happen with much frequency. So when it does, people are intrigued by, hey, what's going on here? That someone was kidnapped either across state lines or, here in this instance, in another country. And what are the facts? Usually it's sensational. So that's why people are paying a little bit of attention to this case more than others.
And you said it's a little difficult to bring that charge, or maybe just not super common. Why is that?
So I have brought in my career when I was a federal prosecutor, I did bring a 1201 case, a kidnapping case. It was a case where a truck driver had driven. He was based in Miami, started dating a woman, and drove with her across state lines as part of his trucking route and essentially kidnapped her, raped her. She almost died. He was abusing her and he was beating her. And she was able to escape. And we had jurisdiction to charge that case here in the Southern District of Florida because they both lived here and they left from Miami to venture out onto that trucking route. It's unique because usually when people are kidnapped, I don't want to say usually, it's not like these fact patterns fit a profile necessarily, but I guess you don't often see someone get kidnapped and taken across or transported across state lines. And certainly internationally, you can charge the statute, whereas the instance here, it's a United States citizen that was, kidnapped abroad. Um, and for whatever reason hasn't been located or found or something's going on there, that those fact patterns don't happen that often, right? I mean, we can all think about the cases where we see it in the headlines: United States citizen, taken against their will or kidnapped abroad. By and large, those are kind of rarities, right? And then even, locally, if you have a situation where there's a kidnapping, usually it's a local situation. So the feds can't really charge those cases. They need them to cross state jurisdiction to trigger that jurisdictional hook or requirement. Here you have that. And so that's why it's not charged as frequently as people would think or see in the media.
So we have this federal kidnapping charge, but a lot of people are wondering if there's going to be a federal murder charge. I mean, we haven't found Anna's body as of yet, but right now she's presumed dead. Is that something that's tricky to bring?
It is because it depends on where she was murdered, whether or not he left here with the intent to murder her. Again, you have to have the jurisdictional hook, not just for one charge you would bring in a federal indictment, but for every single charge that you'll bring. You have to have the federal hook. And to your point, we don't even know where she is. We don't know what's going on here. People are presuming that she has been kidnapped and something's happened to her. I read that he was seen leaving with the bag, or someone that looks like him was seen leaving with the bag. But we don't know. There's no body that's been discovered as of yet. Nobody knows what's happened. But even still, if a body was located, it's harder to bring a murder charge because you need that federal jurisdictional hook. Here you have it with the kidnapping statute because she is a U.S. citizen and this occurred abroad.
We've been talking a lot about that because most of this alleged crime, at least right now, happened overseas. I mean, we have connections because we have an American citizen, but nothing happened here that we know of. So, why is it for sure a federal case then?
Well, because she's a U.S. citizen, and the allegations, at least as far as I've read them in the complaint, is that he, transported her, um, i- i- you know, against her will. He kidnapped her, and this occurred um, abroad, and he flew abroad, I believe, with this intent. Again, I've just read the complaint. So it's hard for me to answer that question because I've read some of the media articles, but what I take as factual here is what's listed in the complaint because that is the charging document. And they have listed out his travel, what they believe to be his travel and his intent when he was traveling abroad. And they've listed out her citizenship and where she was at the time to give them, in fact, that jurisdictional hook in order to be able to charge this case.
Now, let's take a closer look at the more recent developments in the case. One of the reasons we're talking about this case today is because just recently the defendant, David Knezevich, was denied bond for the second time. He had wanted it. Do you think this was the right call? I know there was mention that he was a flight risk. He is from Serbia, and we know he has traveled internationally. Do you think that he is a flight risk?
Well, I know what the elements require for proof to meet the burden of proof for whether or not someone is a flight risk or whether they're a danger to the community. So, just so you understand, there's a different threshold. In order to detain someone based on risk of flight, it's a preponderance of the evidence. In order to detain someone based on them being a danger to community, it's clear and convincing evidence. Either way, okay, either way, um, those are very low thresholds. People are used to, and I think we all are used to the term beyond a reasonable doubt because everyone watches some sort of law show. Everyone watches Law and Order. Everyone's familiar with, a trial show, Suits or something, right? People are familiar with beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the criminal standard in order to convict someone at trial. Beyond a reasonable doubt is not the standard for a bond or detention here. Preponderance of the evidence or even clear and convincing evidence, that simply means more likely than not, okay, if you will. And if you take that standard, more likely than not, and you present the evidence that was presented here before a judge, I could understand why the judge came to the conclusion that he did. And I believe it was Judge Torres this week that most recently came to that conclusion. Because here, look at what has been presented. Yes, there are holes in the prosecution's case. And certainly, there is no body, to your point, right? Like, where is she? But what the prosecution presented was that he had allegedly rented a car. The car had, spray paint or something covering it up upon its return. That car was seen in this area where she was located last. The person who spray painted a camera in or near her apartment complex looks very similar to him. The spray paint camp that was purchased in the store, that person looks very similar to him. Um, and there's just a lot that they were able to tie in to. Yes, judge, it's not direct evidence, but it's really good circumstantial evidence. You have to also remember hearsay is admissible at a detention and a bond hearing. And they admitted text messages where he's having correspondences with a woman, I believe, who's Colombian because his ex wife was Colombian, asking for her to translate things in a perfect way. And then lo and behold, after she goes missing, there's text messages sent to her friends and family who are Colombian that they speculate, he had translated. This is a lot of circumstantial evidence that looks like it's teeing up to that he is in fact the person not only guilty of these crimes, but he's dangerous, and he may be a risk of flight because even if he was to get a bond, he has a place to flee to. I don't know all the facts of whether or not they could secure him here with conditions of a bond, but clearly the judge did not feel that they could, and issued a detention order accordingly. Um, Certainly, I think that even though the prosecution with this sort of evidence, I understand your point, Sierra. It may not be at the beyond a reasonable doubt standard yet, but that's not the standard we're dealing with for a bond hearing.
I know that his defense has also brought up that they are going to appeal this ruling. They say they really want him out on bond. They're going to appeal. What would any of that look like? Do you think it's going to hold up down the line?
So the appeal is going to go to the district court judge who oversees the case. I believe this case has been assigned to Judge Kathleen Williams, and she's going to look at the standard again. And she's going to determine based on the standards which we just discussed, the standard to release someone on bond. Um, under the provisions of what's necessary to look at for risk of flight or danger to the community. She's going to look at that. She's going to look at the evidence that's been proffered, and she's going to make an independent determination of whether or not there is sufficient evidence to detain this person. And again, like I said, the threshold is not that high as one would think. And certainly based on the evidence that we saw, the crime alleged is very, very, very serious. I could certainly see her erring on the side of where Judge Torres ruled and detaining him.
So we know more bond hearings are on the way, but what about the trial? One of the reasons I wanted to speak to you specifically today is to kind of get into the mind of the prosecution, what they're up against here. We talked about a lot of circumstantial evidence that they have in their back pocket, but what do you think they're doing in preparation for a coming trial? How do you think their case is panning out as of now?
So if I was the prosecutor on this case, and I know the prosecutors because I worked with them when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, the unit that's prosecuting this case is special prosecutions. I spent 8 of my 10 years in that unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and like I said, we discussed earlier, I charged a 1201 case. From my experience, and I can tell you, we did that in that case, and I suspect the prosecutors are doing here. They have to put together a very solid picture for the jury, not only of what happened here, but what's happened in the past. Remember, jury trials are stories. They really are. And juries want to know the history of, not just this defendant, but the relationship between this defendant and his ex-wife. What led us to the situation that we're currently in? So I suspect the prosecutors are going back and talking to every girlfriend he's dated, all of his friends, his close circles, his coworkers, his employees. They're trying to ascertain, does he have a history of domestic violence, abuse towards women, mistreating women? Does he have any sort of history where he's talked bad about his ex-wife, talked about killing her, harming her, talked about her, wanting to come after his money, taking his assets? They're going to gather all of that evidence. Some of it, I assume they will try to move to admit. There's something called Rule 404B, where you can get in other bad acts in the right circumstances to paint the picture of who this defendant is and why he did this. What led him to commit this crime? And that's going to help counter, I'm assuming, the defense's picture of him, which is going to be like, he has no motive. Why would he do this? Come on, they're getting divorced, but everything's been great up until now. So the prosecutors have to work with the FBI agents to really paint that picture of how they got here. Now, when it comes to the at here part, they then have to work on that. And they are going to go through his phone. They're going to go through every text message. They're going to go through all his WhatsApp chats. They're going to go through his search history. And it's very shocking, usually, what you find when you go through someone's search history. People don't realize it. They look at on Google for everything. So when you get someone's phone, when you get their computers, when you get their electronic devices, I had an agent when I was a prosecutor once say, give me someone's phone and I could tell you more about them and I will know them better than even their wife does or their best friend does. Why is that? Because people use their phone for everything. Every thought you have, everything you search paints a picture of who you are. And so they're going to be working on really going through all the electronic data and all the electronic devices they have here and putting together the picture of what happened beforehand and what happened on the day of the incident.
To go through all that overwhelming amount of evidence you're talking about, I mean, search histories, call logs, text messages, emails, I mean, there's so much to go through. Obviously, that's going to take some portion of time to go through her information and his. But do you have any sort of idea for a timeline when this could head to jury trial?
No, it's hard to say. I will say in the federal system, cases go to trial faster than the state system by far. But you're right. The electronic evidence always takes the bulk of work in working up a case. And then once you go through the electronic evidence, you have to share it with the defense, and the defense needs the opportunity to go through it as well. So it will take some time. It's going to take months before I suspect this case actually goes to trial. But that being said, that's partly the reason the defense wants their client out. I mean, I can only imagine that their arguments are he's not a risk of flight. He's lived in South Florida for some time. He's gonna, has a place to stay. He's gonna be here. You can put him on electronic monitoring and a high bond, and he'll stay here. But the other big reason that they probably want him out on a bond is to help with that defense. Think about who knows a person's phone the best. It is the person. Who knows a person's email the best? The person. Who knows a person's personal story and history the best? Relationships the best? The person. So now that I'm on the defense, I do appreciate how hard it is to really, really, really put together a defense case when your client is not accessible to you and you have to schedule visits, and those visits are limited in terms of time, in terms of what you can share, what you can bring in. Makes it really hard to build a defense. So I suspect if um, this defendant is remains detained, what's going to happen is you're going to have the defense probably agree to or move for their own continuance of time, and waive the Speedy Trial Act just to get more time in order to put together a really good response to everything the government's going to bring forth.
So there's some time before the case heads to trial, but Vanessa says she has an idea of what the prosecution is working on.
One thing that the prosecutors, I'm sure, are doing, what drew my attention when I looked at some of the media reports on this case was that photograph, allegedly taken in the apartment complex where the victim lived, showing someone, pretty much masked and helmeted up, holding up a spray paint can and spray painting a security camera, I believe at the victim's Madrid apartment. What's interesting about that photograph is you can clearly see that person's eyes. And when we think of what is blacked out as identifiers for a person when we go to identify them, the eyes are always blacked out because the eyes are very telling. The eyes are very telling, and they're very revealing, and they're incredibly distinct. And here you clearly have a crystal clear view of his eyes, some of his forehead, his eyebrow structure. And I suspect the FBI is working quite hard on analyzing that photograph and that video across the board with his social media page, his personal photographs, any documentation they have of him to show the jury, in fact, most likely that is, in fact, the defendant at hand.
And as for the defense, Vanessa says they're going to have to come to court prepared.
I understand that the defense says that he was in Serbia the entire time. He didn't rent the car. He never went into Spain. But given the video of what looks to be like this defendant in the store buying spray paint, given the photograph and the video of someone spray painting the security camera in the victim's apartment in Madrid, given the car was returned with a tremendous amount of miles on it, they've got to come up with a solid alibi, that's not just a single alibi of he was at home having tea or something. It has to be a vetted alibi. He was seen at this location. His phone did not ping in Spain. Something to vet and confirm that this, in fact, is not him, because we're nowhere near the jury trial. But just what we've seen come out through media reports, what we've seen in the complaint, the defense has got to counter that the person that we're seeing in all these photographs, that's suspected to be the defendant, is in fact not him. And it's better be a good story.
Following the ruling that David Knezevich's bond was denied for a second time, his attorneys say they now plan to appeal it in the U.S. District Court. For Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.